When my father passed away, I wasn't called to the will reading. Not a single message, not a single phone call, not even the bare minimum courtesy one would extend to a blood relative. I knew exactly who was behind it. Lucinda, my stepmother, who came into my father's life 10 years ago with a perfectly programmed smile. She had been his personal assistant, then his second wife, then quietly erased every trace of my mother from the Santa Rosa estate. And now, barely a week after my father was buried, Lucinda believed she had won the final game. Isabella Ford, had been cast aside like a stranger, and that was the biggest mistake they ever made. That afternoon, I walked into the law office downtown Santa Rosa, carrying a leather briefcase. Inside wasn't a plea or a dispute. It was the truth, and legal documents powerful enough to silence an entire room. Family lawyer, Mr. Jenkins, looked up and froze for a second. I saw the discomfort in his eyes, like he was unsure how to deal with a ghost from the past. "Isabella, I didn't think you'd come," he stammered. "Don't worry. I'm not here to make a scene," I said, voice calm but every word sharp as a blade. "I just want to hear my father's will." As a legal heir, the conference room door opened. Inside, I saw Lucinda seated in the center, wearing black gloves, her face perfectly made up, eyes gleaming with triumph. Beside her sat her two children, Chase and Kayla, looking more like they were waiting to count bonuses than grieving a loss. Lucinda looked at me like I was a cockroach crawling across the floor. "Oh, Isabella," she said, her voice so sweet it was fake. "I thought you were busy living your independent life in Seattle. No one expected you." I set the briefcase on the table. "Don't worry, I didn't come empty-handed." "I'm afraid," Mr. Jenkins began, but I cut him off. "You said this meeting is only for heirs, correct?" I looked him in the eye. "Then I suggest you review this before we proceed." I opened the case, pulled out a neatly clipped stack of papers, and slid them gently across the table. Lucinda frowned. Chase scoffed. Kayla muttered something like, "What a joke." But no one laughed when Mr. Jenkins began reading the first lines aloud. "Legally executed property transfers completed within the past 3 years. Beneficiary name, Isabella Ford. Assets, the lakefront property on Willamette, a commercial building on Main Street in Santa Rosa, and 3 rental apartment complexes. All formerly in my father's name, now legally mine." No one spoke. Lucinda's face went pale as if all the blood had drained from her. Chase shot to his feet. "What the hell is this?" "No way!" Kayla shrieked. "Dad would never do that. This has to be fake." I looked at them, my gaze cold as steel. He did. And he was careful enough to record the entire process on video. "Want to watch?" Mr. Jenkins stayed silent, looked at me, and gave a small nod, as if acknowledging that the game was over and the winner wasn't who they thought. I took a seat, crossing my legs calmly. "Shall we begin?" I asked. No one answered, but to me, the silence was all the confirmation I needed. I left Santa Rosa 6 years ago, on a rainy December night. That night, I walked out the gates of my family's estate, wearing a work outfit still stained with coffee from the fight with my father. It wasn't our first disagreement, but it was the first time he looked me in the eye and said, "If you can't respect Lucinda as your mother, then you have no place in this house." I stood frozen, hand clutching my purse strap, throat dry and burning. I said nothing. I just turned and walked away. I thought he'd call me back. He didn't. And I never looked back. When the plane landed in Portland, where I started a new job as a project director at an urban sustainability firm, I told myself, "Isabella, from now on, you don't need anyone to show you the way." I threw myself into work. Stacks of dense blueprints, high-stakes strategy meetings, intense presentations before city councils. I successfully led 2 eco-housing projects, received a letter of commendation from the mayor, and was interviewed by a local architecture magazine under the headline, "The woman who doesn't just build homes, she redefines what community means." The accomplishments were real, but every night I tossed and turned, wondering, did my father follow my journey? Did he ever ask himself if he was wrong? I used to try calling home, at first a few times a month, then every few months. Eventually, I stopped altogether. Because every time I called the house at number 14 Magnolia Street, the person who picked up was always Lucinda, and her voice always followed the same script. He's in a meeting, or out with a friend. He said now's not a good time. 3 years passed like that. I started to believe my father had truly turned his back on me. It wasn't until I ran into Mr. Ken, my father's former financial assistant at a conference in Seattle, that I heard a different version of the story. "Isabella," he said hesitantly, "your father asked me to send you some emails a few years back. He was really sad when he didn't hear back from you." I froze. "What emails? I never received anything." "That's strange." Mr. Ken checked his phone, then sighed. "Your Gmail, right? Well, no use bringing it up now, just to hurt you more." That night, I stayed awake. For the first time, I wondered, had I misunderstood him? Had there been an invisible, deliberate hand standing between us? I started investigating, quietly. With some knowledge of account systems, I regained access to an old email inbox that had long been locked, and I nearly held my breath when I found over a dozen messages from a strange but familiar address. It used my mother's last name. And inside those emails were scans of handwritten notes from my father, short apologies, scribbled reflections, even a magazine cover I'd once been featured on with his messy caption, "My girl is brilliant, doesn't need anyone to lead the way." I cried, angry at myself, angry at him, but more than anything, furious at Lucinda. She had stood between us during the most important years. Not only did she take him out of my life, she built a wall of lies and manipulative distance. And my father? Maybe he was too tired, too passive, or too in love with the wrong person to stop his daughter from walking away. I won't excuse him, but I understand him better now. And understanding hurts, even more than anger. 3 months before my father died, I happened to reconnect with an old friend, Marcus, now an estate lawyer based in San Diego. During one conversation, I brought up my father. He looked surprised. Richard Ford?" he asked. "I think I saw him at Ross and Langley's office, updating a trust file. Something about an older daughter living up north. Was that you?" I was stunned. "You're sure?" "As sure as I am that today's Monday." And from that moment, I knew it wasn't over. My father had done something, quietly, discreetly, but big enough to change the game. And I swore, if there was a crack in Lucinda's plan, I would find it. And I would make her understand. I'm no longer the daughter kicked out into the rain that night. The person who texted me was Leia, my best friend since grade school, the one who used to pick strawberries with me in the backyard and the first to see me cry after my mom passed away. I hadn't stayed in touch with Leah after leaving Santa Rosa. Life, work, and old wounds made me avoid anything that reminded me of that place. But Leah had stayed. She ran a small bakery on Main Street, and I knew still sent Christmas cards to my old address. Never getting a reply. Her message was only 3 lines. "I found a few things in your dad's old bakery spot. If you still care, come home soon." 2 days later, I stood outside Golden Crust, the place my father used to visit every Friday afternoon for sourdough. Leah hugged me tight, like 6 years apart had only been one long afternoon. She didn't ask why I'd come back now. She didn't mention Lucinda or the inheritance battle. She just quietly pulled me inside and opened the drawer under the cash register. "You remember that old metal box your dad used to keep here?" she said softly, like afraid she might break something fragile. "I found it last week while cleaning out the storage room. It was behind the freezer." She placed the rusted box on the table and handed me a tiny key taped to the underside of the lid. I opened it. Inside was a stack of papers wrapped in a moisture-proof pouch, A weathered leather notebook and a silver USB drive with a handwritten label. Only open when you're ready. I recognized the handwriting instantly. It was my father's. My hands trembled. Leah gently squeezed my shoulder. I'll give you a moment alone. Opened the notebook first. The first few pages were filled with messy handwriting, as if written in pain or haste. But as the pages went on, the handwriting became steadier, clearer. My father wrote about the many times he tried to reach out to me but failed. The phone calls Lucinda lied about, saying I didn't answer. The letters he'd handwritten and had returned marked, "Recipient moved." My daughter, he wrote, I was wrong to let someone come between us, but I never stopped thinking about you or believing that someday you'd come back. I read every line while swallowing tears, but what stunned me the most was in the middle of the notebook, a hand-drawn chart of his estate, clearly labeled. Transfer under Trust Plan B in stages, sole beneficiary, Isabella Ford. Not Lucinda, not Chase or Kayla, me. I plugged the USB into my laptop as soon as I got back to the inn. Inside, the only folder on the drive were 3 video files and 1 PDF. The first video was dated 3 months before his death. My father appeared on screen, noticeably thinner, but his eyes still bright, his voice still that warm, familiar baritone. Hello, Isabella, he began. If you're watching this, I'm no longer here. I don't know if you'll ever forgive me, but I want you to know one thing. I always believed you'd become the person you wanted to be, not the one anyone else expected. I held my breath watching the nearly 10-minute video. He spoke about each property transferred to me through trust funds, the Echo Lakefront complex, the rental homes near the local university, and the plot that used to be my mother's peach garden, now a public park. Lucinda knows nothing about this, he said, looking directly into the camera. I didn't do it to punish her. I did it to protect you, and to give what we once dreamed of a chance to come true. I broke down in tears. For the first time in years. Not from regret or sorrow, but because finally I knew the truth. My father hadn't abandoned me. He had quietly mapped out a way for me to return, even knowing he might never see me walk through the door again. The final video was a message, not flowery, not tearful, just a simple line. If you still carry your mother's fire, use it to light your path. And don't let anyone, not even me, make you question your worth. I shut the laptop. But inside me, a different fire had just been lit. No longer anger, but resolve. I wouldn't let what my father left behind be buried under greed and manipulation. And if anyone thought I was just someone who came back too late, they were about to see. I've always stood exactly where I was meant to. I arrived at the law office at 1:50 p.m., 10 minutes before the will reading was set to begin. The building sat in the heart of San Rafael's financial district, south of Santa Rosa, once owned by my father, and now, according to the trust documents, one of the assets transferred into my name. I stepped into the elevator, gripping a black leather briefcase. Inside, besides legal documents, was a copy of my father's video. Just in case. 8th floor, the office of Attorney Frederick Caldwell, a man I had never met but had heard was one of my father's closest college friends. The receptionist looked up, momentarily stunned. May I ask who you are? Isabella Ford. I'm here for Mr. Richard Ford's will reading. It took her a second to react. Yes, of course. Please, go into the conference room. I walked through the frosted glass door, and immediately, every eye turned toward me. Lucinda was dressed in a high-collared black dress, hair in a neat bun, sitting straight like she was at a board meeting. Chase was buried in his phone, and Kayla looked at me like I was a stain on their perfect inheritance. Oh, Isabella! Lucinda's voice was syrupy sweet, fake as ever. I didn't expect you, after everything that happened. I'm here to hear my father's will, I interrupted, taking the seat across from her and placing the thick folder on the table, calmly but with weight. No one said another word, but Lucinda's expression shifted from surprised to guarded. I caught her exchanging a wary glance with Chase. Attorney Caldwell entered, bringing with him a formal air that settled the room. Thank you all for being here. As per Mr. Richard Ford's wishes, we will now read his final legally verified will signed 6 weeks before his passing. He began reading, his voice steady, neutral. To my wife, Lucinda Ford, I leave the Magnolia Street estate, including all furnishings and a personal investment valued at $1 million. Lucinda gave a slight nod, as if it were nothing less than what she deserved. To my wife's stepson, Chase Montgomery, I leave the vintage car collection and a trust fund of $500,000, which cannot be withdrawn in full within the first 5 years. Chase smirked slightly, tapping his fingers on the table like he was already calculating how much he could spend up front. To Kayla Montgomery, I leave the family heirloom jewelry and the right to use the vacation estate in Lake Tahoe for a period of 10 years. Kayla looked up, eyes gleaming. Everything was going exactly as they had expected. Until Mr. Caldwell paused, cleared his throat, and continued slowly. And to my biological daughter, Isabella Ford, I leave full executive ownership in Ford Development Group, including all properties under Asset Group B, as outlined in separate transfer documents. The room shattered like someone had just dropped a crystal glass. What? Chase jumped up. No way! Lucinda turned pale. He already revised the will. I was there when he signed the new version 2 years ago. There was another revision, Mr. Caldwell replied, eyes locked on the document. Legally signed, notarized, and filed with the Sonoma County Court. This is the final version. This is a setup, Kayla screamed. Isabella hasn't been part of this family for years. She doesn't know a thing about the company. I stayed silent until the moment was right. Then I calmly slid the folder toward Mr. Caldwell. Inside are the notarized transfer documents, filed and stored at the San Rafael Notary Office. Over the past 3 years, my father quietly transferred ownership of 12 of his most valuable properties to me through trust funds and personal contracts. I paused. If verification is needed, I also have video recordings of him detailing each transfer and the reasons behind them. Lucinda grabbed the documents with shaking hands. She skimmed a few pages before nearly throwing them down on the table. Fake. All of it's fake. Mr. Caldwell shook his head. I'm afraid not. I also have certified copies of these documents personally delivered by Mr. Richard before his passing. Everything is legitimate. And it's not subject to reversal. The room fell into silence. A heavy silence. Like every illusion they had built was crumbling. Slowly. Beyond repair. I lifted my head, my voice steady as stone. You may not have seen me for 6 years, but my father did, and now I'm the one carrying what he worked so hard to build. The day I officially stepped into the CEO office of Ford Development Group, the sky over Santa Rosa was unusually clear. The office was on the 13th floor, once my father's private workspace. The large window still overlooked the Petaluma River, but everything inside had changed. The beige couch he loved was replaced with sleek, cold leather. The old paintings of childhood farm scenes were taken down, swapped for glossy skyscraper blueprints. Like a showroom for concrete dreams. I stood in the middle of the room and slowly placed one thing from the past on the desk. A photo of my father standing at his first construction site, holding a blueprint, smiling, dusty but radiant. We'll start over from here, Dad, I whispered. The first thing I did wasn't signing contracts or firing anyone. It was holding an all-staff meeting in the back courtyard of the building where my father used to host monthly BBQs for employees. I didn't bring a speech, didn't carry a projector, didn't wear a mic. I just stood among them, engineers, legal staff, project managers, even the front desk clerk, and spoke from the heart. I know, I began, you're all wondering who I am and why I've come back. No one replied, but I saw their eyes. Skeptical, curious, tired. I'm Richard Ford's daughter, but that title means nothing if I don't live up to what he believed in. Building not just buildings, but communities. I paused, letting each word land. I'm not here to tear things down. I'm here to restore. After the meeting, I personally visited each department, asking every person one simple question. If you could change one thing about this company, what would it be? Not everyone had an answer right away. But by the end of the week, my desk was full of notes, some handwritten, some typed, with honest feedback, frustration, and hope. I started with the Paseo Verde project, the riverside land Lucinda had approved for a luxury apartment complex with an infinity pool and a shopping center. In my father's original blueprint, it had been called Community Riverfront, a mixed-use development with affordable housing, public gathering spaces, and local retail. I brought the design team back together, scrapped all the old plans, and added several local residents to the advisory group, including a single mother, a school teacher, and a small bookstore owner who'd been priced out of downtown. We used to think this company didn't care about people like us anymore, said a woman named Carla during one of the meetings. I used to think that too, I replied, smiling, until I read my father's journal. We redesigned the entire project. Price-controlled housing, a public green space along the river, vendor stalls for small businesses protected from price hikes, and an open-access library funded by the Richard Ford Foundation. The news spread quickly. Some newspapers called me a non-traditional heir. A few real estate investors were openly annoyed. But I knew what was coming, and I was ready. The town council meeting was held at the community center 3 weeks later. I arrived early, carrying the new design schematics, cost analysis charts, and most importantly, a handwritten letter from my father, written last year, outlining his vision for this land as part of the town's green lung. I presented the plan in 15 minutes and ended with a line that made the whole hall go silent. Let's not allow a riverbank to divide the rich and the poor. Let it connect the community instead. My opponent, Vincent Langford, who had once partnered with Lucinda to turn the site into an upscale shopping district, stood up in protest. Miss Ford doesn't know this town like we do. She left for 6 years. I smiled. And you've abandoned it for 6 years by profiting off every square foot of it. The room buzzed. The chairperson banged the gavel. When it was time to vote, my hand trembled slightly, but my heart didn't. 7 votes in favor, 0 against. The Paseo Verde project was officially approved, following my father's vision. I stood and bowed my head. In that moment, I could almost hear my father whisper, "Well done, my girl." I never expected the first person in the family to reach out would be Kayla. 1 week after Paseo Verde was approved, I received a message from her. Just 2 sentences. "We need to talk. It's not about Mom." We met at a small cafe near the town library, once the old bakery my mother ran. Kayla arrived early. She wore no makeup, no sunglasses, no trace of the entitled Miss Montgomery I used to know, just a young woman who looked like she had taken off a mask. "I'm not here to apologize," she began, her voice so blunt I almost laughed. "I'm here because I want to understand. Why did Dad choose you and not me or Chase?" I looked at her, then said gently, "Because I didn't treat him like a wallet." Kayla laughed, not bitterly, but with the weight of resignation. She told me things I never knew, that for 10 years, Lucinda had taught them to see the company as a prize, not a legacy. That my father had tried to take Kayla on business trips, but Lucinda always made excuses that she wasn't cut out for business. That Kayla had once wanted to study architecture, like my mother, but had been forced to switch to financial management. "I didn't hate your father," Kayla said, staring into her cold latte. "I hated that he let my mother manipulate everything." I nodded. "He wasn't perfect, but he tried to make it right, the only way he knew how." Kayla was quiet for a long time, then softly said, "I found a notebook in his old things. There's a part where he wrote about someone named Rose in New Mexico." I froze. Rose. That was my birth mother's name. And also the woman my father had mentioned only once, briefly in the second video he left behind. Kayla looked at me carefully. You know who that is? Yes, I whispered. That's my mother. 2 days later, a woman named Alice Thornton showed up at my office gate. Graying hair, worn khaki coat, and a canvas bag embroidered with the words, Prescott Environmental Institute. I'm Alice, she said. Richard was my father. I think you and I need to talk. Alice was nearly 20 years older than me, the result of a college romance between my father and a teaching assistant in Arizona. They broke up before she had a chance to tell him she was pregnant. It wasn't until Alice was 30 that she found him again, and he welcomed her as a long-lost part of his life. He once invited me to come to Santa Rosa, Alice said as we sat in the garden behind the company headquarters. But I turned him down. I didn't want to disrupt what he was building with his new family. Her voice was low and honest. But I knew about you. He always called you the one with his mind and her mother's heart. I smiled, tears silently rolling down my cheeks. And now I want to help you, Alice said, if you're open to it. Alice was a sustainable development expert. After a 3-hour conversation, I asked her to be the environmental advisor for a new project, Greenbelt Commons, an eco-urban neighborhood I was preparing to propose to the town. She agreed, for Richard. And for you. As for Chase, he'd disappeared from town after the will reading. Rumors said he was in San Diego, dabbling in crypto trading. I didn't care. But the biggest surprise was an email from Finn Montgomery, Lucinda's youngest son, 8 years younger than me. Subject line, about number 9 Birch Street. And a crazy idea. Finn wanted to open a farm-to-table restaurant using ingredients from local farms and was searching for a location within the properties I now owned. I remembered him as the little boy who used to sneak into the kitchen to steal cookies. I know who I am in this story, Finn wrote, but if you'll let me prove it, I want to do something genuinely good for this place. I agreed to meet with Finn. His plan made sense, and more than that, it was sincere. I agreed to lease him a storefront in the Central District at a startup-friendly rate, with the condition that if revenue didn't stabilize after 6 months, I wouldn't charge any additional fees. The restaurant, Thistle and Grain, opened a season later, and surprisingly, it became a local favorite, both for the food and for the story of the unlikely heir and her bold investment. I found her in the greenhouse behind the Magnolia Street estate. She was trimming wilted orchid stems, leather gloves on her hands, the sunset casting soft light through the dusty glass panes, making her face look blurred, like an old portrait once admired but now forgotten. You don't have to pretend to care, Isabella, she said before I could speak. I know you're here for the transfer agreement. I placed the folder on the stone table in the center of the greenhouse. I am, but not just for that. Diana pulled off her gloves, eyes still fixed on the flower pot in front of her. I signed. Your legal team will get the originals on Monday. I said nothing, waiting. You won, she finally said, turning to face me, not with rage or bitterness, just emptiness. I lost everything. I took a deep breath. No one won here, Diana. My father is gone. This family broke long ago. She gave a dry, brittle laugh. How noble of you to say. But you're still the one sitting in the chair I once imagined for my son. You're still the reason I'm leaving this town with nothing. Not nothing, I replied. My father left you this estate, the remaining shares, and a significant investment portfolio. If you want to live the way you used to, you still can. Do you really think I want to keep living in a town where everyone sees me as a greedy widow? She pulled a cigarette from her coat pocket, then tucked it away unlit. I used to think if I had enough money, enough status, I'd never be left behind again. Like when I lived in that trailer park north of Sacramento. I looked up. That was something I never knew. I met your father when I was working as a temp office assistant, she said, her voice even. He walked in and gave me a smile I'd never seen aimed at me before. He taught me that real cheese had to be cut with a silver knife, and roses should be pruned every morning. She paused, eyes flickering. I loved him, in my own way. I said nothing. For the first time, I didn't see her as a villain. And you? She asked, her voice unexpectedly soft. Did you ever forgive him? It took me a few seconds to respond. I think I understand him now, and sometimes understanding is enough. She nodded, lips pressed into a tight line, then turned back to her orchids. I'm leaving next week. There's a vacant apartment in Greenwich, Connecticut, near my sister's house. They run an arts nonprofit. I hear they're looking for a coordinator. I hope you find something truly meant for you, I said. Diana turned to look at me one last time. You really are like your mother, but sharper. I smiled softly. And you're more like my father than you realize. We parted without a hug, without a handshake, just two women who once stood on opposite sides, now standing together in a damp greenhouse, sharing a long overdue truth. The following week, my attorney confirmed that Diana had officially withdrawn all legal claims. She sold her remaining shares in Ford Development Group in exchange for a lump sum payment. The Magnolia Street estate, once my home, now echoed with the emptiness of rooms far too large. A few weeks later, I received a parcel. No return address. Inside was a small velvet box and a handwritten note. These once belonged to your mother. I shouldn't have kept it. D. I opened the box. It was the silver brooch with pearls. The only thing of my mother's I thought had been lost when Lucinda redid the entire house. I held it in my hand, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel a weight in my chest. I returned to my father's old office on a sunny May morning, light pouring through the windows, the oak tree outside just beginning to sprout fresh leaves. The space had once been renamed the Strategic Management Suite, under Lucinda, with a sleek black glass desk, abstract art, and an automated espresso machine. But now, it had returned to itself. Warm walnut wood, hand-drawn zoning maps on the wall, and my father's old, stubborn desk he refused to replace for 30 years. I placed a small brass plaque on it. Richard Ford, the man who built community. An old photo I had brought from my mother's house sat framed at the corner. My father and mother standing in front of their first job site in Sacramento. She wore a white blouse, hair neatly pinned, eyes full of trust as she looked at him. That's where they had started, just the two of them, one dream and no guarantees. My mother once dreamed of becoming an architect, but she gave it up to raise me and support my father. I decided to establish the Rose Ford Scholarship Fund, dedicated to supporting young women who wanted to study architecture and urban design. The fund would cover tuition, housing, and hands-on internship programs in community projects sponsored by Ford Development. At the launch event, I stood before hundreds, students, young architects, city leaders, and shared my mother's unfinished dream. We can't change the past, I said, but we can give someone else the chance to carry that dream forward, stronger and whole. Alice, my half-sister, sat in the front row, nodding quietly. She had officially moved to Santa Rosa and accepted the role of Director of Strategic Programs at the newly formed Richard Ford Sustainable Development Foundation, an organization created to fund eco-conscious initiatives locally. Richard used to say, Alice shared at the foundation's first press conference, that development isn't about building more houses, but building more opportunity. He wanted each generation to have better chances than the one before. Hearing her speak, I saw my father's gaze, the one I had seen in the videos he left me, now reflected in hers. Soon after, I started receiving thank you letters from girls in rural Idaho, from a Mexican-American student in East Los Angeles, and a young trans person who had been denied other scholarships for being unfit. Each letter was a piece of healing, not for me, but for people I had never even met. I stayed in touch with Kayla. She enrolled in a part-time interior design course, something she had never dared to do before. And Finn, the quiet youngest brother, had opened a second location for thistle and grain, this time in a complex my company developed. One early summer evening, I walked along the Paseo Verde riverbank with Elliot, my best friend from college and now my strategic partner. Elliot had been by my side through everything, the legal documents, the design drafts, the family battles I thought I'd never escape. You know what? I said, turning to him, my hand trembling slightly. I think it's time I build something for myself. Not a company, not a legacy, a family. I pulled a small box from my coat pocket. Elliot looked at me, stunned. You're doing the thing I was going to do 2 weeks ago, he murmured. I laughed. Guess I beat you to it. He took the ring, a silver band engraved inside with a simple line. Brick by brick, breath by breath, together. We got engaged right on the wooden bridge leading into the Riverside Park, the place that had once been an abandoned lot, and my father's dream to turn it into a space for the entire town. I don't know what the future will look like, but I know one thing. The legacy I inherited isn't just land deeds, balance sheets, or buildings. The real legacy is belief, vision, responsibility, and I will build the future on those very things, the way my father once did. But this time, I won't be building it alone. Isabella's story isn't just about reclaiming an inheritance, it's about healing. Healing herself, her father's legacy, and a community long overlooked. In the real world, the most precious things aren't always material. They're in our power to rise after pain, to choose forgiveness over revenge, and to turn loss into something greater. True legacy is love, long-term vision, and accountability to the next generation. What do you think about Isabella's journey? Did it resonate with you? Surprise you or offer a new perspective? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories about life, family, and the choices that define us.